can't assume, to go here, we can't assume that a person is, because they're Latino, or that they're going to be bilingual, or they're going to be speaking Spanish. You know, we have third, fourth generation Chicano, for example. That word is used a lot in California, in Arizona, New Mexico. They don't speak any Spanish, but they're very prideful. You know, I'm Chicano, native to the land. You know, I didn't come here as an immigrant. I'm not an immigrant. This is a very big issue, and language becomes an issue because you have to understand that you might see somebody and they have a very strong name, you know, a Hispanic sounding name, and no, they don't speak Spanish. And then you have people who speak Spanish, but they don't read it and write it. That's another issue, and I'm facing that now in my bilingual education training program. We have lots of kids from Dallas they speak a lot of Spanish, but you know, they can't write it, and they've never been educated in the language. And so the issue becomes teaching math, science, or some academic subject. They have no training. And so our teacher education program in the state of Texas is only a 2-year program. I don't know how much you could teach somebody another language in 2 years. And so we have some issues, and I think it's good for people to understand the diversity. I put here something else that you may not even have considered, and that from Mexico come a lot of Indian people. I don't know, has any of you met any Indian people from Mexico? They don't speak Spanish, but they're Mexican Indian, Zapotecas, Mixtecas, and they have a hard time because they don't know Spanish that well, and they're struggling with their language, and they're struggling with English. The other issue, language or attitude-wise, has to do with home language, family literacy levels. This will influence whether the children are quickly able to assimilate, to learn, to read and write in English. Now I'd like to discuss even the semantics of some words, and one word being educado or educación. You know, the whole meaning of educated person to American, so to speak, is different than saying my son is very educado, my daughter is so educada. We have so much educación in my family that it has a whole different meaning. And it's an important word, and I would like for Diana to elaborate on this word.
Sure. It's important to understand, for example, in educado, in terms of the Hispanic culture, in many regional areas of the Hispanic culture, educado is its good behavior translates to good behavior. The first thing as a parent approaches as teachers, ¿cómo se portó, maestra? How did he behave, or how was he today? Behavior is very, very important, and that they translate una buena educación, a good education, as good behavior, whereas we translate that to going to school, going to college. And so that also correlates with how parents see success, and the meaning of success also in terms of education. What is el éxito? Mm-hmm. What is it that my goals and my success and the success that I see my child accomplishing might have a different meaning to the parent. And so when we're talking about college and career readiness, and we bring them and we talk about college opportunities, and we talk to them about all these different scholarships that are out there, we need to be very explicit on how we present those topics to them, because we might not be connected with them with how they perceive success and education. And so that's important for us to have some background as we approach those topics that are now very, very important in our education systems. Anyone else would like to?
You did great. Yeah. Which has a kind of a sidebar here on this term of educado or educada. Be careful what you tell parents about their children. Some parents, if you say your child is not behaving well in school or not doing well, that could lead to a big beating. It could lead to some real physical problems. I think you just need to be very careful about how you talk about the child or how you give them a message, because it could have consequences that you didn't think about, because it's not part of your culture. You wouldn't think that that's going to lead to the child getting hurt, but you have to be careful about it. This word special education, educación especial, a person from Mexico or another country may not know what does this special education thing about. And it sounds strange. Special? Oh, my son is special? You know, wow, that's great. I mean, I'm not sure that they really understand the IEP, the whole system, and all of that. So it's sort of an issue there, and wondering about if we have enough trained people in bilingual special ed, and if that is an area of need, maybe more training for the staff to work with people. Because it's not always a language issue. For true, there's about 3% of the population has some special academic need, irrespective of language, irrespective of home culture or anything like that. So we have to be careful. I think we all need to just examine our own attitudes toward bilingualism and the use of 2 languages in school. And what do teachers tell parents, think about it, about using the mother tongue at home, about reading or speaking at home in the native language, the home language. I've heard some stories that make me a little nervous. Maybe this group would never do that, but I did hear about some teachers telling parents not to read to their children in their home language. Maybe that's the only language the parents can read in, or that separates them from their grandparents. If the grandparents are living at home, when you don't use the home language, there's just a lot of issues related to language and use in the home. I'd like you to elaborate a little bit about what happens when the child becomes a speaker of English and the parents in the community are not, and neither are the grandparents.
I think one of the most difficult things when we as educators are trying to bring the English out of the children, when we know that the child is going home and just hearing pure Spanish at home, but we need to be mindful that they're having vocabulary expressed at home, and whatever level it is, if it's academic or social, they're using vocabulary. And if we heard that an English speaker was going home and there was discussion and there was talking and there was all these different conversations going on, we would embrace it. So we need to make sure that we embrace the vocabulary in Spanish at home. Yes, we know we want our children to have an academic language in English, but there's still vocabulary going on. And if the child wants to sit down during the morning message and say, yes, I spoke at home. Okay, what did you speak about at home? And then have that child translate it. So there are different strategies you can use instead of saying, no, you need to try to speak English at home. Let's try to see if we can say that in English. What did you do in the classroom? In the classroom, you can say, what did you do at home? And how would you translate that into English?
I actually did have that happen, I'm sorry. That a parent, after a parent-teacher conference, came to me and said, the teacher said that I shouldn't be reading in Spanish anymore. And this was a general ed teacher, 5th grade, because we're trying to promote. But I think, as Dr. Sotelo said, one of the things that we need to focus on and express to our teachers, we're trying to instill a passion and love for reading and literacy, whether it's in Spanish, Vietnamese, whatever language they speak, and that's what our goal is. And yes, I understand that the goal is to get them to speak English because we are in the United States, and that's what they're going to use eventually as they progress in their academic career. But again, it's that love for reading, for literacy, and if we're trying to take that away from sharing that with their families, then what are we really telling those parents? Because again, we're trying to involve the parents, not exclude them from this experience. So again, I think it goes back to us educators and just teaching, and it's just getting trained on that literacy is literacy, whatever language it is. And it's our job to teach them English. The parent's job is to just help them develop that vocabulary, whatever language it's.
Yes.
And if I may add as well, now that we have more programs, especially bilingual programs, trying to build biliteracy and dual language, we also have to keep in mind that it's very important that if a child brings a social Spanish into the classroom, that as educators, we should not suppress that language, and we should not allow the child the opportunity to use that social language, because we have to keep in mind that that social Spanish is the one that they use to navigate in their communities. They're the ones that they use for their home and to have access to the resources in the community. So it's a language that is essential for survival at home, with family, and in the communities, and therefore we have to utilize that, build that academic Spanish if the goal is biliteracy, and help the child navigate between the three languages, which is the social Spanish, the academic Spanish, and the English Spanish. And so that way the child has a sense that they can fit into the academic setting, but they can also feel proud when they go home and use their social language to navigate the resources they have in their communities. So it's very important that when we build those programs, that we support our teachers in understanding that, because often we find that our classroom teachers, no, that's not how you say it. No, you don't say it that way. And that is not right. And so we constantly suppress that identity that connects the child to the home, and it's very important that we rather highlight that and embrace that and use it for instruction. So.
Thank you, appreciate it. Summing up a little bit about diversity within the population, just a few things I'd like to just bring to light if you hadn't thought about it before. The issue of ethnicity and national origin, civil status, all of these things. Language and bilingualism is a little summary here. Socioeconomic status, this is something we didn't talk about, but it's huge. And its effects on attainment, nutrition, access, technology at home, transportation, attendance, after-school clubs. If you consider that a person not only might be linguistically diverse or culturally diverse, but also maybe not have any money, not have a place to live. Maybe they can't pay the rent and they have to keep moving. Maybe they can't get to school because the car broke down. Maybe the children have to watch the other children while the parents go to work, or if they're lucky enough to have a job. If they're not here legally, then that's a big problem, because they can't work, overtly, and so they have to earn money some other way. Then there are people who maybe their parents they disappeared, they got picked up. They're on the other side of the border now. I've experienced all of that as a school teacher over my lifetime. And I'll tell you, it breaks your heart. There's just so many things that the people go through. Gender attitudes is another whole can of worms. Gender attitudes by national origin. Sometimes girls are discouraged from studying certain subjects, or things like not to look too smart or whatever. Girls go through some things, I'll tell you. And rural versus urban. This is another thing. Urban immigrants versus rural immigrants. Many rural immigrants, I've worked with some, don't know how to hold a pencil, never been to school. Many years ago, I remember I used to be here at Dallas at a time when the Cambodian tragedy took place, and the children were coming with burns on their body, and they were traumatized by war. And I always say, every time there's a war somewhere in the world, we're going to see those kids in our ESL programs. They'll be here. But recency of arrival, and certainly intra-ethnic attitude, I'd like for us to discuss that a little bit. The behaviors between the generations and citizenship issues. So recent arrivals from Mexico, Mexicanos that recently get here, are confronted sometimes by third-generation Mexicoamericanos or Chicanos, and it's like another culture, there's no connection at all, and there's even some attitudes that are quite negative, and they exhibit those. They're not as welcoming as one would think, I'll tell you something kind of weird. I was married to a Dominican. David might know this story. And Dominican people are very dark, and compared to light-skinned people from Europe. And funny issue is that my father-in-law was a very, very dark-skinned man. And his daughter, who was